I grew up on a dairy farm in the middle of nowhere, Central Texas, and I learned to drive at a very young age, like concerningly young. But a lot of that was practical because I was expected to help out on the farm, and it didn't make any sense for me to wait until I was 16 to start doing that. And I remember sitting on my dad's lap in a big Case International tractor, my feet swinging, as he taught me how to shift, raise, and lower hydraulics so I could help him load hay bales. And as long as I could steer, shift, and more importantly, stand on a brake if I needed to stop, Dad would let me drive anything. And on the farm, vehicles were just another set of tools, like a shovel. And so growing up in that environment, me and my friends eventually started abusing the hell out of vehicles. Primarily because we'd been driving so long, we went from seeing them as tools to seeing them as toys. Give a group of boys some shovels, and in 15 minutes they're playing sword fights. Same thing here. We're driving around in the middle of fields, get bored. We try to duplicate what we see in Knight Rider and the Dukes of Hazzard. And the nearest sheriff, 45 minutes away. So we were not worried about the law. And we were surrounded by gravel roads and open fields. The worst thing we could hit, post oak tree or run through somebody's barbed wire fence, we could fix. So by the time most kids were learning to drive at 16, I'd been driving for years, and I was sliding farm trucks around the gravel roads of McLennan County like I was trying to outrun Roscoe P. Coltrane from the Dukes of Hazzard, and most of my friends could too. So one day when I was in my early 20s, after a big storm had blown through and dumped a bunch of water on the farm, I was in my Jeep Wrangler with my best friend Jason, and my friend Sean was in his Jeep down in one of my dad's fields mudding. And it was fun. We were sliding around in the fresh mud, blaring rock and roll, and drinking Coors Light. Now, I'm not going to condone drinking and driving, but I'm also not going to omit important information. So we weren't drunk, but we had been drinking. Now, as we were sliding around, I tried to keep my distance from Sean in his pickup because he was not the best driver in good conditions. And like I said, we'd been drinking, and I didn't want him slamming into the side of my Jeep. Now, the field we were in sloped down towards the Brazos River. And right before the river, there was a little pond that was shaped kind of like a horseshoe. And the top part of that U, the open end, there was a ditch that ran the entire length of that field and fed water into that pond. The back part of that pond had a big dirt dam that encircled it, like a dirt berm. It was about 5 feet tall at its tallest, to keep the water from going into the Brazos. Well, we were mudding around that pond, and Sean started driving his truck into that ditch at the front of that pond. And he was hitting a little clump of dirt hard enough, the front end of his pickup was coming up 3 or 4 feet and then slamming down in that ditch. Well, when I saw Sean doing this, I backed up and stopped so Jason and I could drink a beer and watch when Sean inevitably wrecked or broke something on the truck. I did not want to miss that. And as we were sitting there watching Sean jump the front end of his truck into that ditch, Sammy Hagar's song, I Can't Drive 55, came on the radio. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with this song, but it's very exciting. It starts off with this great guitar riff, and it's all about how Sammy can't be bothered to drive 55, and the cops are always after him because he's speeding. So Jason and I are sitting there listening to this song, smoking cigarettes and drinking cold Coors Light, and I got an idea. I put my Jeep in reverse and back us up so Jason and I are pointed directly at the 5-foot dam. Jason goes, "Hey, man, what you doing?" I didn't say anything. I just slid it into first gear, made sure 4-wheel drive was engaged, and then I said, "Hang on, man, we're going to jump it." And before Jason could say what, I popped the clutch and hit the accelerator, and we took off, aimed directly for the dam and the pond on the other side of it. Now, I do not know how fast I was going when I hit it, but I do know I was up in third gear and needing to shift. And y'all, we sailed off the top of that dam, sailed. And just for an instant, I felt like one of the Duke boys. And if this was an episode of the Dukes of Hazzard, right about now is when the image would freeze with me and Jason in midair. And Waylon Jennings would come on and say something smart like, "I bet them boys is wishing that Jeep had wings, don't y'all?" That Jeep did not have wings. And reality slammed down as soon as we did, and water flew up on both sides of that Jeep. And the moment that those wheels touched the bottom of that pond, I knew I had screwed up royally because we started sinking. But I wasn't going to give up, y'all. I had my foot on the floor. That motor was wound out, engine screaming, both wheels turning, shooting rooster tails of mud, but the only direction we were going was down, deeper and deeper into that mud. And by the time I killed the engine, we had about 6 inches of water in the floorboards. And Jason looked over at me, and he was furious. And he goes, "What the fuck did you think was going to happen, man?" I should have told Jason that the reason that I did it was that I knew that the water was only about 2.5 feet deep. And my plan was for the water to break the fall of the Jeep so the Jeep wouldn't get hurt and we could drive out. And then I could throw it in Sean's face about what a real jump looked like. And I was right about that first part. Landon didn't hurt a thing. But I should have gone on to explain to Jason that where I had miscalculated in my plan was the driving out part. Because I had forgotten, I don't know if I mentioned this, but I've been drinking. I'd forgotten that my dad had built that pond specifically so our cows could stand in it and get cool during the middle of the summer. And so while the water was only about 2 feet deep, the cows would stand in that pond for hours on end. The bottom of that pond was like cake batter. But instead of a cake batter made out of milk, flour, and eggs, it was made out of sand, cow piss, and cow shit. And that mud went down another 2 or 3 feet. So Jason and I had to wade out of that pond. The mud was so bad it ripped our shoes off. We had to throw them up on the bank. It was nasty. The water looked like a big bowl of ranch-style beans, all brown with floaters. We finally get out, and I have Sean drive us up to the farm because I know we are not getting this Jeep pulled out by ourselves, but I really do not want to tell Dad what I had done. Not because my dad is a yelling dad. My dad is the opposite of yelling dad. My dad is a laugh and make fun dad, and I knew he would call me stupid and laugh at me for an extended period of time, which he did, and then he asked me to go get a tow chain and said we'd go try to pull it out. By the time we got back down there, it had sunk several more inches, and he laughed even harder. And then he was damn near in hysterics as me and Jason had to rip all of our clothes off, wade back out into that water, get underwater so we could dig mud out from underneath the Jeep and hook up the tow chain to the frame. And it was sunk so bad the truck wouldn't even pull it out. We had to go get one of the tractors. Now, luckily, Jeeps are easy to clean, or at least the old ones were. They'd have plugs in the floorboards. All the carpet is removable, and most of the instrument panel is water resistant. So I just went to the barn, and I got one of the power washers, and I just sprayed the whole inside of that thing off. I was finally able to blast all the mud out. That smell was going nowhere. And it was terrible, y'all. It would burn my nose hairs. Several weeks after that, I cleaned that Jeep up real good, and I took it to the Jeep dealership in Hillsboro, Texas, and I traded it on a brand new one. And the man gave me a good price for it, too. He goes, "It looks like it's in real good shape." And I said, "Yes, sir, it sure is." I knew it was only a matter of time before the transmission or rear end went out, and I did not want to own it when that happened. Now, the postscript of this story is that in preparation for the show, I called Jason, who still lives back home, and I read him what I'd wrote because it was like 25 years ago, and memory is really unreliable. Plus, I don't know if I mentioned this part in the story, but I'd been drinking, and I wanted to make sure that I got everything right. And Jason demanded 2 points of clarification. He said that he thought it would have been important at the beginning of the story if I mentioned that all of his friends, while we were copying what we saw in our shows, we had all collectively decided to stop jumping vehicles because I had jumped a 3/4-ton four-wheel drive pickup and busted all 4 rims on the landing, and thus I should have known not to jump a Jeep. I had forgotten that. He then went on to say that in the story, I tell y'all that he was furious at me. He said that was not the case. He remembers laughing when he asked me what the fuck I was doing because he said he thought the jumping was fun. He would do that again today. But he did say, "I was madder than a motherfucker at you when we were wading through that shitty mud, and I wanted to drown you in it." So he wanted to make sure y'all knew that. So if there's a moral to this story, and look, I get it. I'm probably the only person in this room that this moral applies to. But if there's a moral, it probably is this. Be careful when you listen to Sammy Hagar and drink Coors Light. It will make you do crazy, crazy stuff. And the last thing I'll leave you with is never, ever, under any circumstances, buy a used Jeep Wrangler. Thank you.